one just in case I can share it later. So yeah, let's talk about push and pop again. Uh, this one is definitely one that takes a while to get used to. So it's not unusual that it would be, it would be hard to understand at first. Um, but you understand the translation stuff. Should I go over that part too, or just the push and pop part?
I think I understand the first part.
Okay.
Maybe if other students want to go over it, but I'm okay.
Okay. So yeah, so I'll just go into the push pop aspect of it. We can always come back to it. So it's a little bit different in the for loop example that we just saw, in part because let me collapse this a little bit. Uh, we have push and translate, and then pop down here, but there's no other transformations happening. So that might be part of what's confusing, is that the reason we're doing it this way is because we're in the middle of this for loop. So we have to remember that this code is being repeated like, somewhere between 20 and 100 times. It's being repeated over and over and over again. And so we do have to like save our matrix and then, go back to the beginning sort of. But let's look at a more simple example. So I'll take a look at the reference first. So if we go to the reference, um, this is going to be under transform. And so there's different transformations that we can do. We can rotate, we can translate, we can scale, we can shear. And if we want to do more than one of those in one sort of sketch or one go, I actually don't see where push and pop is on here. So let's just do a control F, look for pop. Okay, it's under structure for some reason. Okay, so we see push and pop. Let's take a look at push. Um, and so push we can see says start a new drawing state. And in this case, it actually does a little bit more than what we've kind of talked about. It also it saves the stroke weight and the fill and all these other things about our canvas. Um, but we've mostly used it just for our transformations because you don't really need it for other things, but you really do need it for rotation and scaling and things like that. But anyway, it saves all this stuff. So we draw an ellipse. You can see the ellipse over here. Just has the basic styling. And then if we say push, this starts a new drawing state. And then we change all this stuff and we draw a circle in the middle. Okay, so there's the circle in the middle. It has a bunch of different properties. And then when we pop, we go back to the original state. And so when we draw this right circle down here, we can see the circle on the right, looks the same as the circle on the left. And so that's the basic idea. And you can see this is all of the stuff that gets pushed into the state. So the fill, whether, no fill, stroke, if you have a tint, image mode, color mode, all these different things that we can set to change the way that we draw on the canvas get saved into our kind of like stack of states. So the reason that it does it this way, it has to do with the way that the HTML5 canvas works, where that's what, like, if I set a color, like if I say fill is blue, and then I draw a rectangle, it's going to stay blue. So if I draw another rectangle at 2020, or let's do something more. Let's do one, oops. Okay, so now I have two blue rectangles because once I set the fill to blue, that means that it's going to stay blue until I change it to something else. So one way to do that is I can say, fill is green, and I can draw another rectangle, which let's just keep going, 200, 200. And so now we have a green fill. And everything that I draw after this is going to be green. But if we have like a lot of stuff that we're changing and then we want to set it back, or if we're doing a rotation or certain other things, we can use push and pop. So when we start drawing, we have something called the original state. And this is just all the defaults, like the fill is white, the stroke is black, all of those basic defaults. The corner of the canvas is the top left, all of these basic things. So we have an original state. And when we push, we create a new state. So this creates a new state. Let's call it the blue state. And I don't mean like Democrats. So our new state is blue state. So we don't even have to do a rotation or anything fancy. Just changing the color will create a new state. And so if I pop after, this goes back to original. And then actually there's a green guy down here, which is going to take us back to here. So let's do a push. Whoops. Down here, this is our green state, and we'll pop that one as well. Okay, so our original state, the default is white, fill black stroke. So even though there's nowhere in my code that I wrote fill white after this, because I go back to the original state here, when I get to this rectangle here, this one in the middle, now it has the original state. And then I have my green state here, and so I have my green rectangle here, and when I pop the green rectangle, I come back around, and so that's why I have the original state at the beginning. So push and pop is not just for transformations. We use it for transformations because you have to do a transformation to do a rotation. And so, I can get if I take out all my push and pop, so I can take out all of these push and pops. And so now I have two blue rectangles again, and I'll just delete them. Whoops. Okay. So I can take out my push and pop, and now I have two blue rectangles and a green rectangle. And I don't really need to use state to change back to my defaults. I can just say fill is white, and there we go. We've got a white fill. But if I want to translate and rotate, then that's where things start to get tricky. So let's say I translate to 200x. So now I move my whole canvas over. Now I can't even see my green uh, box. And then I rotate. Let's say I rotate by um, uh, pi times 0.1. So just a small rotation. So now, if I want to go back to the original state, if I like my blue rectangle translated and rotated, but I don't want to do that with my white or my green rectangle, I either have to reverse this translation, which is kind of tricky, right? I could do it. I could say, translate back negative 200, 0. Oops. And then rotate negative pi times 0.1. So I can actually reverse my transformations, but it's a little confusing, right? And if I do a ton of these, then it's going to get super confusing. So what's easier than reversing my translation and my rotation is just creating a new state. So I push a new state, and then I get rid of it. So then when I pop, I go to original state. So now I can apply these transformations up here, and now at this point I don't have to do a fill white here, although it will turn green if I don't do another push pop. So yeah, that's basically what push and pop does, and it's a little confusing. We haven't covered. It's based on like push and pop are common programming terms that we haven't covered in this class, and we probably won't get to because it has to do with data structures, which is a little bit advanced for an intro level programming class. But you can think of push and pop, you can think of it as making a stack of pancakes. So our original way of drawing is the first pancake. And until we push or pop, it's always going to look like that. It's going to have our default color, and position and rotation and stuff like that. And when we say push, we're basically putting a new pancake on top of the stack, and then we keep doing that we until we have like a whole big stack of pancakes. But when you have a stack of pancakes, if you take one off the top, that's when you pop one. So it's in programming, it's called last on, first off. So the last thing that you put on the stack is the first thing that comes off the stack. So eventually you come back to the original state. So yeah, it is a little bit confusing, like when to use it. But it makes sense to use it inside of a for loop because you're repeating these same actions, but you don't want to keep those transformations. So if I did that, like if I go back to my grid example, if I didn't push and pop uh, before I translate, so if I take these out, what'll happen is most of the stuff will just be off the screen because once we get past a certain point, we're just like, pushing further off the screen. So I think, yeah, it just keeps translating. So I'm just like moving further and further and further away from the origin. And so every time I change it, we don't see anything because all of my shapes just keep moving farther and farther away. Um, so uh, by pushing and popping inside of each loop, I'm like saying make a new context that's like over here on the grid, but then go back to the original. So then I go to the next point in the grid and I do stuff over here, and then I go back to the original place. So I'm always returning to where I started so that I can, make my grid without, continuing to translate all the way off into space. Um, so hopefully that made sense. Does that kind of
Yeah,
clarify?
yeah, definitely. I can't say like I understand it like fully, but yeah, that definitely helped,
Okay.
and I know when to use it. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a tricky concept. It's more related to, like, as I mentioned, like some more advanced programming techniques that we probably won't cover in this class. You'd probably cover them in, like, the second level of this class, or if you take a computer science class or something like that, they would probably cover it there. But yeah, it is a little bit, it's one of those things where uh, like many programming concepts, you're probably not always going to get it the first time you see it. It's probably going to take seeing it in a few different places before it starts to sink in exactly what's going on. All right. Oh, let me stop that